Hi guys. As we close out 2024, I wanted to share with you my early retirement journey, the why behind retiring early and how it's working out. So it might be interesting for several of you, who are contemplating embarking on a similar adventure. For context, my name is Vinod. My friends call me Vinny, and I announced my retirement at my company in mid 2023 at the age of 45. My last day of employment was Feb 9th, 2024. And I can say that this has been the best year of my life in terms of personal well being, health, and general happiness. In the last year, I've traveled to 14 countries in 5 continents and then visited Antarctica to make it six. And when I land in Sydney in March of 2025, I would have visited all 7 continents in 12 calendar months. I thought that'll be pretty cool. I picked up a new sport, a pickleball, won a few tournaments while still working on getting better at it. I have goals on where I need my rating to be at the end of 2025. I've worked on my physical fitness. I got selected for the USA over 40s cricket team. I played tournaments in multiple countries, in Pakistan, the World Cup in South Africa, a tournament in Dubai, which has been a dream come true, to play a sport that you love at an international level, representing the country that you are indebted to and that has shaped you as a person. It's been amazing. I learned a new language. I learned Spanish. Still a lot of work to be done, but it allowed me to get by during my travels to Nicaragua, Chile, and Argentina this year. I also made several new friends on my travels during the cricket tours and through pickleball. That has enriched my life. And when I got bored, I drove Uber and had such an interesting experiences with conversations with people from all walks of life that I would have never otherwise experienced. And I have a 4.98 star rating, by the way. I also offered my consultation services at various expert networks that it helped me keep getting engaged with business and technology and provided some intellectual growth, some intellectual stimulation. Now, I can't wait for what 2025 has in store. Maybe it's a new YouTube channel. Now, could I have done all of this while still being employed where I was? Probably not. Did I know how my year at retirement was going to look like? No, I had no idea. I knew I would travel, but that's about it. Then how did I make that decision? Well, most people who retire early, take one of two paths. One where you realize that you have reached financial independence and then you decide when you want to hang your boots. Or two, you are driving towards financial independence with the goal of retiring early. And I fall into that latter category. It all started during the pandemic. It gave us a lot of perspective, and it certainly caused me to pause and take a step back and look at my life more holistically. I realized that since I was working like crazy hours, I didn't have the time to do the things that I would like to do. Moreover, I wasn't consciously making healthy choices. I had gained weight. I wasn't physically fit in general. So I started watching a lot of YouTube videos about the FIRE movement and from others in the journey. As I researched more, it dawned on me that in order to have the freedom to do anything we want in life, we need three things to be existent at the same time: enough money, time, and health. For most people, you generally have only two out of those three essential components at any given time. In your early years, you have time, you have health, but usually you don't have the money. In your middle years, you're growing your career, you're climbing the corporate ladder, you're working several hours, you're making money, but you also have family responsibilities. So, time becomes the biggest issue for you. And then finally, when you retire, say at the traditional age of 65, you have all the time and the money that you need, but typically you don't have the health or the fitness to do the kind of things that you would have liked to do or you put away. So I wondered if I could maximize the time in my life when I have all of these three ingredients in place, and I set my goal of retiring at 45 with the hope that I would have 20 awesome years where I could use these three components of my golden triangle to the max. Now, how difficult was the decision to quit? Well, it wasn't easy. There are multiple considerations when you contemplate hanging your boots at work, and the biggest factor usually is financial. At least that's what we fixate on initially. Although there are other factors that are equally significant that I'll talk about maybe later, but having the numbers work was a prerequisite before I could think about any other factor. So I'll go over, how I did the math and what were the assumptions I made. Again, for context, I worked in tech and had grown up the ranks to be vice president of technology at my company. I was in that position for 4 years when I announced that I was going to retire. I was obviously highly compensated, and from a career standpoint, I had probably reached my peak, or maybe I had further room to grow. I might never find out now, and that's something that I had to get comfortable with, because I knew that once I made this decision, and even if it wasn't a permanent decision and maybe only a sabbatical, my career trajectory would probably never be the same as it would be if I had continued working. From a financial standpoint, as I mentioned earlier, I was highly compensated. And in tech, a large percentage or part of your executive compensation is in stock. And tech stocks have done very well over the past decade. So my portfolio had grown significantly, even though a lot of my net worth was in my company stock. So anyway, here's what I did. I laid a set of assumptions. And based on those assumptions, I had to figure whether I could retire or not. And here's the list. Like, assumption one, my standard of living is not going to significantly change post retirement. Now, I've done a detailed analysis of my expenses over the past 3 years. Most of our expenses are on credit cards and through bank transactions, so it was easy to go over all those statements online, create a spreadsheet. I did this over a weekend and realized that over 3 years, my expenses were actually within a 10% variability range. Now, since we had never done any budgeting all those years, so we pretty much spent on whatever we wanted, I figured that my future expenses, if inflation adjusted, would be similar. If I account for a couple extra things like what was covered by my company, healthcare, because I'd have to get my own insurance. And then since I would have this additional time, maybe more time for travel and entertainment. So more money for that. So I added like extra line item costs to what I was spending the previous 3 years, where I added healthcare. I added $25,000 for healthcare for the family, and then $25,000 for additional travel that I would probably spend on. So that was assumption number one. Assumption two was that a large one-time expenses will not happen like in the same year, like many large one-time expenses. So we often, we'll have some home project, or suddenly you need to buy a car, or some big ticket item. Um, and I figured that I would be able to stagger those in such a way that I can account for one large project every year. Like for instance, we a couple of years ago we changed all the windows in our house, and that cost us what, $25,000, I think. Um, Similarly, I bought a new car this year. I traded my old car. I paid it off, and the difference was about $22,000. At some point we might want to remodel our bathroom. I know that's something that we want to do. Maybe a similar expense. So my understanding is that I can stagger these every year, so I don't have multiple of these coming in the same year. So that is assumption two. The third assumption is that college expenses won't be significantly higher than what's in the 529 plan. So I have one daughter who's in middle school, and college expenses are always a big variable depending on where she goes, in state, out of state, whether she gets a scholarship, etc. So for me, I would like to support her education needs regardless of where she decides to go. So it was important for me to have enough in our 529 that would support this. And I don't consider the number in there in my calculations for my retirement, right? So I'm thinking of that as her college money, and hopefully that will be sufficient. Now, those were my assumptions on expenses. The other part of the assumptions are related to investments and ability to draw down from my investments to support my lifestyle. So, assumption four is that the 4% rule holds true. Now, the 4% rule, what is that? Now, it's I wouldn't call it a rule as much as a guideline, but it's based on extensive research by Bill Bengen that is kind of widely accepted. Basically, it states that you can withdraw 4% from your portfolio of assets each year and adjust that for inflation, and you would never run out of money. That's assuming a 60/40 stock bond portfolio and assuming a 30-year retirement. Now, this has worked for every time scenario based on his research over the last 100 plus years. Now, this was published by Bill Bengen back in 1994. Now, since then, it has recently been, obviously, we have a lot more data now, and it has been updated to a 4.7% safe withdrawal rate. And even it could be even higher if you had some other asset classes other than a 60/40 stock bond portfolio. So that's the updated version. And recently he even suggested that a 4.3% safe withdrawal rate can be used for a 50-year retirement. Now, that was something obviously I was looking for. I was looking for like 45, 50 years. And that made me feel very secure. So that's an assumption that the 4% or the 4.3% rate actually holds true. Now, even though these are like widely accepted safe withdrawal rates, there's always going to be a certain amount of fear whether these numbers will actually work, because it's your life that you're talking about, right? So I took a little more conservative approach, and I did all my math based on a 3% withdrawal rate. So that gives me a significant buffer, I believe, right? So what does that mean, a 3% withdrawal rate? What I mean is, if I withdraw 3% of my assets each year for my expenses and adjust that for inflation each year, then I would not run out of funds for the rest of my life, even if I live until, say, 95. For illustration purposes, if my expenses were going to be $100,000 a year, then I would need to have a $3.3 million portfolio, and then I would be okay to withdraw what I needed to meet my expenses. Now, based on extensive research, I figured that this was fairly a conservative way to estimate. Now, assumption five, um, the tax rates. Because currently, we have a system where qualified dividends and long term capital gains taxes are fairly low. So, my assumption is that those tax rates do not change significantly over time. Current system has your first about $90,000 taxed at 0% for long-term capital gains, and then 15% until you reach around 400,000, and 20% beyond that. So, and these numbers may not be exact, and they are not exact. They are directional. So let's take a use case, right? So say I wanted to withdraw $200,000 from my portfolio for next year, right, from my brokerage account. Now, since you're only going to be taxed on the gain, let's assume that out of that 200,000, 50,000 was cost basis. So that's what I put in. So you only get taxed for the gain, right, which is 150,000. Now, out of that 150,000, the first 90,000 is taxed at 0% for long-term capital gains, and then the remaining 60 K would be taxed at 15%. So when I add that up, it's about $9,000 in tax for a withdrawal of $200,000, which is about 5% of expenses, right? So when I did the math, I factored in, like for my case, I factored in, like, let's say even if it's 10% of what I withdraw towards taxes, would I be okay? And again, I figured that this was quite a conservative approach that accounts for some changes in taxation laws over the years, but it still assumes that the long-term capital gains rates are going to be lower than the earned income tax rates, right? So that was assumption five, that there's not a dramatic, significant change in long-term capital gains taxes. Assumption six was I will have the ability, and this is really a big assumption, that I will have the ability to reduce my discretionary spending or make some supplementary income if ever the need arises. Now, I assume that despite doing all the math, things could go very differently from plan, and say I need to spend less than my drawdown percentage. I need to draw down less. Can I actually make that change in my lifestyle for a short period of time, maybe a year or two? And when I looked at all my expenses, there was significant amounts of discretionary expenses. And like, for instance, the travel, right? I could cut down on that. I could do low-key travel. We could go, instead of going to across the world, I could go to travel within the United States, in the Caribbean, or Central America, where I'll still be traveling, but it's probably a lot less expensive, right? Or maybe even Asia, right? So I could cut down on my spending, was one assumption, and then if the need arose, could I make some income through supplementary means? And I figured that, if push came to shove, I would get a job. I could maybe be a contractor for some time. So I figured I could bridge the gap if it really came down to that. So those were my assumptions. And then finally, I did consider, like, what happens if there's a black swan event, like World War III, or an alien invasion, or like hyperinflation for multiple years, or any kind of apocalypse, right? Well, in that case, I figured we'd all be screwed. And we'll all be figuring out how to deal with that new reality. So we'll be dealing with it together. And at least if that happened, I would look back and say, at least I enjoyed some time with having that golden triangle. Um, so to summarize those assumptions again, um, one, the standard of living will be fairly consistent as it is today. Two, my ability to stagger large one-time expenses over multiple years. Um, my college expenses for my daughter would be covered mostly by the 5229. 3% is a safe withdrawal rate for early retirement. Long-term capital gains tax rates will not change significantly. And six, I can ratchet down spending or gain supplementary income for short durations if needed. Now, let me know in the comments if these make sense and have I missed something major. Um, I would love to hear. Okay, now that the numbers work, we can talk about other factors influencing the decision to quit. Now, a big part of that for me was the fact that I was doing really well at my job. I loved my team. I had developed a very close partnership with them, friendship. It was like a work family. Um, I had an additional like 30% of my net worth in unvested equity, which I would lose immediately if I quit. A lot of these factors, right? The equity part, though, was actually easy. I asked myself, like, whether I would really inflate my lifestyle if I had a lot more money. Like, I never really had any interest in fancy cars, mansions, boats, or like designer wear. Um, I have always seeked and yearned for experiences versus things to own. So I quickly concluded that the trade off of having more money by working an extra couple years versus having the time to do what I want to do, having the time always won. Plus, it's really a never ending cycle of equity. Right? Each year you get equity, which vests over a 4 year period. And when does this greed ever end? So, the most important question for me was would having that extra money change how I live my life? And my answer was no. Now, outside of compensation, there are several other things we get out of employment. For me, I enjoyed the social aspect of work with several colleagues. As I mentioned, I had a work family. Um, there is this intellectual stimulation and growth since you're constantly trying to solve problems and it gives you a sense of maybe purpose. I don't know if purpose is the right word, but it gives you a sense of worth, of being appreciated, adding value. Somehow that the work you are doing is benefiting others and you're adding value, and that affirmation that you are getting, it comes from that you're adding value comes from like your compensation, your feedback, performance appraisal, 360s, your promotions, etc., right? um, Now, how do I compensate for that? Honestly, I didn't think about these things too much. I reflect on it a lot more after retirement. I thought at that time that I'll figure out how to get these outside of work over time. So I didn't really factor it in much. The biggest driver for me was if I had the time, um, then I'll figure what I want to do with it. Um, and now, over the last year, I have been figuring it out. The journey has been amazing. Um, And I could share more about those aspects down the road. Now, I understand that I am extremely lucky and privileged to be in the position that I am, and to have the choice to do what I did. Over the course of the year, I've been asked numerous times by several people, several questions like, how has this journey been? How did you go about it? And I thought this YouTube would be a great way to share my journey, with the hope that it might inspire or educate others that are in a similar position. So I could share more. If you have feedback or suggestions or questions that are more in detail, I could go cover a certain topic. I know this was more like an overview. Um, and I also do a lot of travel, very interesting travel. I do plan to post a video of my trip to Antarctica on the National Geographic Explorer expedition ship. Um, so tune in for that. And do like and subscribe, because that will motivate me immensely to post more of this content. So until next time, savor the journey.